Hello, 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 and welcome to today's episode of Her Version. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of struggle to triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth in order to inspire and uplift others. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria, and if you are new to this podcast, make sure you follow, like, subscribe, and share. Let's jump right in. Thank you for joining us today for this episode of Her Version. I have an amazing guest speaker with us today, Tessa. Tessa is dedicated to empowering and creating an atmosphere where people can become more confident and more balanced. She believes in giving people the opportunity to shine authentically without fear or anxiety and cultivate meaningful relationships with themselves and with others. Her story is so inspiring, and I'm so thrilled to have her here with us. Welcome, Tessa.
Thank you, Sabrina. It's always
How,
humbling to get an introduction like that.
yes. How are you this morning?
I'm really good. Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day in between all the craziness that you have going on to sit with me and open up a little bit about your backstory and all of the wonderful things that your life has taught you throughout the way. I love bringing women on with stories like yours because it just gives so many women hope, as they're going through their stuff, as they're going through their junk and their darkness and their challenges, to know that it is possible. It is possible to come out the other side and to be smiling and to find joy again and happiness. And sometimes it doesn't seem that way when you're in the funk. So
Yeah,
I appreciate you.
thank you.
Of course. So, one of the things that I want to start out with this morning is kind of just a little bit of your backstory. I would love for you to start out, kind of telling us a little bit about your past and maybe some challenges you went through that helped set you up for the journey that you're now on.
Yeah, thank you. And it was so interesting when you asked that question, and even what you're saying now is because, you know, like everyone in life, I've had my challenges, but sometimes hearing other people's stories, I often felt that I was, nothing majorly bad happened to me, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
some things, if I would tell people, they go, "Oh my God," I mean, they were challenges, but then I always felt sometimes nearly hesitant to share them because I felt, well, other people have experienced things that seem so much worse. So how can my challenge, like, there was an element of guilt, nearly, of like, well, I shouldn't have felt so bad about these things because it could have been way worse, and other people experience much worse things than I have. Yet and that's actually one of the things, both for myself and for others, that I now help with, that your feelings are valid. Like, whatever happens to you, however small or big it is, how you feel about it, you can't help that. You feel about it that way. And so some of the challenges that I experienced, that kind of really um, touched me or influenced me, were, for instance, coming from a broken home. And again, both my parents loved me. Um, both of them were involved in my life. So on the one hand, right, I didn't have a really bad childhood or growing up, and yet it really impacted me deeply to grow up with parents who were not together, and they separated when I was 6 months old. So I've never ever experienced being part of a family unit, um, really from that beginning, if you like. And that did influence me a lot. Like, a really silly example, maybe, that I remember being at a friend's house when I was 16 years old, and the father coming home saying hi to the wife and kissing her on the cheek and saying, "How was your day?" And I remember sitting open mouth, like, "Oh, that's what that looks like." just not and the
Wow.
realization that we take something like that for granted, right? And again, it's not, I didn't experience child abuse or anything, but yet the impact of growing up, like not having that, and how I remember my first relationship where I lived together, that I really nearly felt lost in the sense of, I don't know how to do this. I've not had the, have the I mean, I've not experienced this. What am I supposed to do? So I think, challenges can be seemingly um, mundane nearly, if you like, yet they can really, really deeply impact you. And I think that's one that really yeah, comes to mind. And also um there's been many, like I've gone through bad breakups, I've moved country, there's so many things that, but to me they all seem so um small compared to what other people um may have experienced, and yet I know how deep they can impact you, and that validation of that for yourself, right? That's so important.
Yeah, 100%. And I can actually totally relate to everything that you're saying because even with my stories and now looking at my stories, I actually feel like they're a lot more impactful. But I actually remember going to this training at one point, and we were supposed to go home and like make a phone call to somebody that we like weren't being authentic with or something, and open up and tell our real truth, and then come in the next day and share our story. And when we got to the class the next day, the teacher asked like, hey, what were some things that you did last night that were like impactful, that really changed the trajectory of your life? Nobody raised their hand. And he's like, why is anyone raising your hand? Like, are you telling me that nothing happened? And I was in the front seat because I'm like brown noser, I always want to be the best, 100%er and all the things in my life. And I kind of said under my breath, no one feels like their story is good enough. And he heard it, somewhat. He goes, what did you say? And I said, well, nobody probably feels like their story is like good enough to be shared. And he's like, is that your experience? I'm like, 100%. I did my phone call, but I just don't feel like it's that impactful. And he made me stand up and literally yelled at me for belittling my own story to the point where like I started crying. And he did
Yeah.
it in a loving way. I shouldn't say he like yelled at me, but he very much reprimanded me for like for me, almost like as if I was two people. Like, how dare you not allow yourself to tell your story, you know?
Yeah.
And it hit me real hard. And it was at that point when I started to really recognize how important it was. And what was so funny is he made me share my story, and it actually related to like 12 or 13 women in the room. There was probably like 50 of us. And the hands just went up like crazy of people that totally related to my story. And the whole atmosphere changed because of my story. And I didn't think it was even that big of a, I mean, it was a big deal, but not exactly what you're saying, basically.
Exactly, because you see even now, you try to kind of say like that it wasn't such a big deal. You're nearly apologizing, right? Whereas like, and I think that's my biggest learning from that was as well that um the shared experience, like you've mentioned it, inspiring other people with your story, it's less nearly about what actually happened than about how it made you feel. So although maybe like one person may have lost a loved one, or someone else, it's just, as a child, I remember losing my teddy bear, but the experience of that sounds awful, but it may have been nearly been as bad, right? So I'm not saying,
Yes.
of course, I'm not comparing the two, but to anyone actually, you know, be heard and seen in how you experience this without judging, is my event that I've experienced, is it worse or less bad than what you experienced, but the actual feelings you have,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
have a space that you can, that it doesn't matter what you experienced, but more how did you experience it, and can you be heard with that.
Exactly. Yeah. I totally agree with you. and understand where you're coming from 100%. There is something that I want to talk about with you. When we were on the phone and our initial conversation, you had mentioned a word that I would, or a set of words that I would love for you to kind of expand on. And the words were reactionary depression. So, first, is this something that you've experienced? And then, second, what is it?
Yes, is the first answer. And yeah, so I think this is one thing that it's one of these, like what we just talked about, in a way that from a very young age, I've always been very sensitive and I've struggled with anxiety on and off. And which again impacted also how I experienced different events. But then in my mid 30s, I had a breakup. And again, as I said, we go through these things, right? I wasn't married. We didn't have kids. So, it didn't seem that bad in a way, right? But for some reason, it hit me so hard that I couldn't stop crying. I didn't eat. Through my work, I went for counseling. And the counselor then she said, I hate the term, but you have reactionary depression, which basically means it's not like it's similar to clinical depression, but it's really a reaction to an event. So as a reaction to something that happens to you, it's like a little bit like, I don't know, it's yeah, like a traumatic event. And but I was kind of, as I said, it's like, well, this is ridiculous. Like, it's a breakup. Come on, I mean, this happens to people, right? This is not, you know. Yet she said, yeah, but um, whatever you think it may be, or whether you think it's ridiculous or not, this is what you have. So you better, like, you need time to deal with it. And actually, um, interestingly, they wrote me a sick note for work. She said, "Look, you don't. I give you, and I'll put down." The doctor actually was very kind as well. She said, the doctor said, "I'll put down stress, really, that it's for stress,
Yeah.
um, because that means you're allowed to do whatever you like, what gives you not stress." So because at the time, I worked for an organization supporting people with disabilities, which was a quite stressful job because our clients would be people that are in the worst situations. So you saw a lot of misery. So it was very impactful job as well. Although I liked like I very much liked my job, but it was tough. But I also was self-employed already as a holistic therapist, and I did also coaching and healing. And she told me, she said, "Look, if that gives you joy, if you feel able for it, go for it, do it. If it doesn't, don't. But I give this note so that you don't have to go to your employed job, and you don't have to feel guilty about doing anything else, even if it's working for your own business." Because I felt like, well, that seemed a bit unfair, but said, "No, it's stress relief. You need to do whatever gives you joy." And that was so powerful, even to get that permission
Yeah.
to do what gave me joy. I was like,
Yeah.
well, if I don't do this, then I shouldn't be doing that either, right? And she's like, nope,
Yes.
just figure out what gives you joy. Anything that doesn't, don't do it. Anything that does, do it.
Wow, that's
Um,
so interesting.
yeah.
So interesting. So I have a question then. From what the definition that you just gave me, does that mean that there's probably a lot of people that actually have reactionary depression, but they're labeling it themselves because they haven't seen a doctor as just depression?
I'd say it could be, yes, because I think the difficulty as well, right? Like, I mean, as I said, I've never officially been diagnosed with depression, so I don't think I have it. I know there have been times in my life, as I said, I struggled with anxiety, but I think it's more linked to being high sensitive. So things affect me quite quickly. But because I've done a lot of practice around my own development and mindfulness and everything, I'm quite able to deal with things. Um, but I think the difference is, like, people who suffer from clinical depression are obviously better to tell that story. But
Good point.
I think if I know that people always say that you never, it's not, you can't be cured from it, if you like, right? You can learn to live with it and you can manage it, but it's there in a way. And I think with reactionary depression, it's more it is more temporary in the sense like it's really like it's a sort of yeah, injury or backlash or trauma from that
Yeah.
event, and then once you have processed that, then in principle it's no longer there. But the symptoms are exactly it. And I remember at the time, because my background is I'm a trained social worker. I've done, as I said, I've studied life coaching, I've done mediation, I've done conflict studies. So
Mhm.
I really felt like I should just be able to manage this. And I think that was the powerful thing. And that's also, I think, for people when they experience something like this, the realization that doesn't matter how good you are at whatever job you do or whatever you've studied, that you know what to do. It's not about that,
Yeah.
because it's your body, your psyche, everything has a reaction that you will have to accept you're having that reaction, right? You just, as I said, in my case, um, like as I said, I knew this is what I helped other people with. I knew like exactly what I should be doing, getting, going outside,
Got it.
doing everything. But I physically, emotionally, mentally, energetically, I couldn't do it. I just
Yeah.
really, really couldn't. And I got
Okay.
even more angry and frustrated with myself because I felt like, well, this is what I do. So um hearing someone actually kind of acknowledging that,
Yeah.
and again, that permission, I think
Yeah.
that was so important, to get that permission, and being told, look, don't be so hard on yourself, there's nothing you can do about this, you will have to go through it,
I love
whatever way
that.
you do it, but you have to go through this, you cannot fix this.
Absolutely. I love that. And it kind of goes along with, you're allowed to feel your feelings
Yeah,
for,
yeah,
however long it takes. Sometimes it takes a little bit.
yeah. And I think even more so than being allowed to feel it, that also the message, and that was, to be honest, quite tough, that also there was like the only way through this, the only way to get out of this, not over it. I think that's also something, you can't get over it in a way, right? But to get out of it is to feel it, and you
I've
have
never
to be
heard that
ready.
before.
Yeah,
Wait, to get
yeah,
out of it, not over it.
yeah,
I love that. I've never
yeah.
heard that before.
Yeah, I think that's, for me, it comes a little bit from my background with meditation and mindfulness, a lot of coming from Buddhist practices as well. Um, but it really, really helped me that this was not something I had to fight. This was not something I had to overcome, that I had to get rid of or let go, as much as I wanted all that.
Yeah.
But that it was like, if you want to, yeah, as I said, get out of it, or get whole again, if you like, you have to accept that this is here now, and you have to go through it. You have to feel it. Only by feeling it, by integrating it again, um, will you find that joy again as well. And I think, but also, and I think that was very important too, there were many days at a time, and it still happens to me with other things now as well sometimes, that there is moments where you're just not able for it, right? There was times where it's just, this is too much. I felt like, obviously I wouldn't actually die from it, but it felt, honestly, it felt that bad that I was like, I cannot feel this right now. I'm going crazy. I cannot, I can physically, emotionally, I cannot handle it, right? And then also the strength to say that it is okay to distract yourself,
Yeah.
right? I always compare it to whatever work I do with people, for myself and for others, that um, I don't believe in quick fixes, and I don't believe in anything that's like a painkiller that you just suppress whatever's there. But sometimes you need it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Absolutely.
I remember a meditation teacher of mine who said, I remember being crying and saying, and I can't even meditate, I can't find any peace. He said, go watch Netflix for an evening. But it was
Really?
so powerful to say, hey, it's okay. You can
Yes.
you're allowed to distract yourself a little bit, just knowing, don't use it as like, don't do it day in, day out, all day
Yeah.
long,
Yeah.
right? And I
Yeah.
think that's the big problem that happens a lot, is that we take a painkiller, we do something to suppress it, and then we go, oh, that feels nice, let's leave it there. But
Yeah.
then it festers.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely.